Now we will hear from Dr. Nita Prasad of the History Department, and she will be discussing Hindu-Muslim relations in the early modern period.
I have to have my notes, because if I don't follow my notes, I'll go on for an hour. So, okay. So religious violence, that's what I want to talk about today, or rather, violence that's cloaked in the rhetoric of religion. We hear about this a lot these days, but some of the worst religious violence the world has ever seen occurred in 1947 on the Indian subcontinent, as the subcontinent was being partitioned into the two nations of Pakistan and India. The migrations that accompanied this partition led to countless dead, displaced, raped, maimed, kidnapped, the victims number in the tens of millions. My dad, who lived through partition violence, he was about 10 years old at the time, tells stories of fire trucks that had two separate hoses. And when the firemen would come to burning houses that, mind you, had people in them still, if the firemen learned that the home belonged to a member of the opposite religion, they would select the hose on the fire truck that was attached to a kerosene tank as opposed to water. Some of the images of partition violence that were kind of typical in 1947 in northwestern India. And this kind of Hindu-Muslim violence rages on today, unabated. Anybody remember Thanksgiving 2008, when Islamic terrorists laid siege to the city of Mumbai? I think we're used to seeing these kinds of scenes. It's this kind of violence, unfortunately, fits easily into our world. But I think what's interesting is that it did not fit into the pre-modern world. At least in India, Hindu-Muslim violence is an incredibly new phenomenon. Hindus and Muslims have been living together on the Indian subcontinent since the early 700s, yet the first hint of religiously inspired violence occurred at the turn of the 20th century, so the early 1900s. In fact, there's good evidence that for over 1,000 years then, Hindus and Muslims lived together not only peaceably, but there were such high levels of tolerance that the line between the religions began to blur. Think about that. What this means is that Hindus back then would sometimes adopt Muslim worship and belief, and vice versa. As late as the 1800s, in villages all over India, local priests used to read from Hindu and Muslim religious texts seamlessly during services, going back and forth between the two. Villagers used to worship Hindu deities alongside the Islamic Allah, or God. I think it's hard for us in our world to understand this kind of religious practice, because in our world, religions are neatly pigeonholed into wholly separate and often hostile camps. But back then in India, religion was seen as a tool, as something that could provide real-life solutions. So, for instance, if you were a villager in India and you had been experiencing really bad drought for years, and you had prayed to your Hindu gods of rain repeatedly, but the rain didn't come, then, hey, why not try some Muslim incantations for rain? May work, right? So they approached religion back then the same way we approach medicine today. So today, if you sprain your wrist or you sprain your ankle and you go to the doctor and whatever the doctor gives you doesn't seem to work, you might think about going to an acupuncturist. Or you might think about trying some herbal-based remedies. You might even see a homeopath or maybe a chiropractor, right? For us today, trying out one type of medicine doesn't threaten or challenge our belief in another. That's how religion was practiced in the pre-modern period in India. And it really makes me question whether modernity can be described as unqualified progress. So, thank you.